Adolf Hitler. He's probably the most reviled man in history. Since 1945, the details of the Führer's suicide and his bizarre after-death journey have been shrouded in rumor, mystery and deception. My name is Dr. Mark Binecki. Follow me on a twisted forensic treasure hunt to unearth Hitler's remains.
Aren't they beautiful, don't you think?
They are beautiful, really.
And uncover secrets first hidden in a KGB archive more than half a century ago. My journey back in time begins on a darkened street that could easily pass for Germany in the spring of 1945, just before the collapse of Berlin. My investigation will take me from Washington, D.C.'s Holocaust Museum to Zurich, and then deep into a former KGB archive. As I set out on my quest, little could I know that I'd soon become one of the first Western forensic scientists to gain unhindered access to all of Hitler's known remains.
Beautiful box.
Очень красивая коробка. Это единственный фрагмент.
In Hitler's case, since there is no flesh left, I'll need the help of forensic anthropologists, historians and eyewitnesses to help piece together the story.
All of Berlin is under Soviet control. And that
My first expert witness is historian Gerhard Weinberg, who has been studying Hitler for over 30 years.
bunker was and so on, but also why, after Stalin's death, the Soviets kept important parts of this secret into the 1960s, and then still kept parts of it secret into the 1990s. That is even more difficult to explain.
This was a very, very good test for me to find out if I assumed wrong things, and I did. For example, when I started the investigation, I thought by looking at the forensic evidence alone, we could understand everything and find out, but that was not the case. Our detective tale begins in spring 1945. Berlin was chaos. By April 30th, Red Army soldiers had surrounded Hitler's bunker. As the Third Reich disintegrated, the Führer burrowed deep below the city to orchestrate his final act of self-definition: suicide. 4 days later, a pair of severely burned corpses were discovered outside the bunker by victorious troops. A secret Russian autopsy identified the dead as Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. But instead of presenting proof to the world, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin hid the evidence and gave rise to one of the most enduring myths of modern times. 40 years after Stalin's death, the Kremlin claimed to have stumbled upon the skull and teeth of Adolf Hitler and his beautiful mistress. The news created more questions than answers. How did Hitler kill himself? Was it a bullet in the head? Poison? Or both? More importantly, are these really the remains of Adolf Hitler? The best place to start is with the evidence, so I booked a flight to Moscow. At first, the scientist in me took over, but the more I traveled back in time, even I couldn't avoid the cold touch of this one man's horrific legacy. Here I am in the Moscow subway, a tunnel that was likely used as a bomb shelter during the Nazi invasion. I like the metro a lot, but I like all metros because the moment you start down to ride the metro, you're part of the city. As if on cue, a fascist parade welcomes me to Moscow. Russian officials have long feared that Hitler's remains could become objects of worship for neo-Nazis like these. It's one reason they have kept the Führer's bones hidden for so long. In a country where secrecy seems like state policy, getting my hands on the evidence will be my biggest challenge. We have an interesting criminalistic question. Is the chain of custody really tight? Meaning, where have the case artifacts been? Who did what with them and why? Do we believe that the skull cap really belongs to the teeth, or do we not believe that? But then the deeper you look, the more complicated it gets.
It says jaw Adolf Hitler, so this is most likely from the medical doctor.
When the Russians first surrounded Berlin in April 1945, the battles were fierce. Hitler refused to leave the capital and retreated to an elaborate bunker, 15 meters below the Reichschancellery. He was surrounded by loyal aides, including propagandist Joseph Goebbels and his family. Historian Gerhard Weinberg describes the scene for me.
The noise of battle is not hundreds of miles away. It is reaching into the bunker area, and the moment any of them get out above ground, they know they're at risk of being killed by shells, shrapnel, bombs, goodness knows what else, falling buildings. The racket above ground is colossal. And so in the underground area, there is this weird, and I do mean the term literally, weird mixture of hope, despair, claustrophobia, puzzlement as to what to do, with a recognition that it's all coming to an end.
The Führer has collapsed. He regards the struggle as hopeless now. When the Russians come, he intends to take the consequences and shoot himself. He has code for Goebbels, his wife, and 6 children. They will kill the children, then the adults will commit suicide. General Karl Koller, April 22nd, 1945.
Then, on April 29th, during their final hours in the bunker, Adolf Hitler married his longtime companion Eva Braun. She, too, intended to commit suicide.
As sort of special gifts for the wedding celebration, they're each given a cyanide capsule, which one would have to say is a sort of unusual gift to give people on such a festive occasion.
Sometime later, Adolf and Eva retreated to their personal quarters and shut the door. In the years since the war, all kinds of theories emerged as to what happened next. Not far from Hitler's bunker, a body double had been found by victorious Russian soldiers who initially thought this was the corpse of the Nazi dictator. It wasn't. But the body double and intentional deception by the Russians themselves would help give rise to claims that Hitler had somehow survived the war. To find out what really happened, I'll first need to look through testimonies from bunker survivors. Hitler's personal assistant Otto Günsche proves very helpful.
My immediate impression was that Eva Braun, as well as Hitler, was dead. The head was canted slightly forward to the right. I noticed an injury to the head. At this point, I left to inform those waiting in the briefing room. The Führer is dead.
Other eyewitnesses corroborated Hitler's and Braun's death, but details about how they did it differed. Some reported poisoning with a cyanide ampule, others claimed he shot himself. For the Russians, the debate had great political meaning. Poison was the coward's way out, while a bullet to the head was seen as somehow more noble. Would the remains locked inside the Moscow vault put this and other mysteries of Hitler's death to rest?
Пожалуйста.
The details of Hitler's alleged suicide, whether it was death by poison or a gunshot to the head, have been obscured for years. My name is Dr. Mark Binecki.
Oh, okay. And how about
As a forensic scientist, I first need to paint a picture in my head of Hitler's final days in Berlin.
I've never seen very many people.
So I turned to curator Elena Gmuria at Moscow's Armed Forces Museum.
we went in?
The Soviet soldiers expressed their feelings and their enthusiasm about their victory at that time.
So what is written on this stone here?
Kremля.
Yeah.
Well, it means the Kremlin. Here, soldiers said, "You had never seen our Kremlin, but Reichstag, kaput."
Ah.
Yeah, I think that this word kaput is very understandable.
It
yes?
is very understandable.
Yeah.
And it is quite kaput,
Yes,
right?
and it is quite kaput. 1945 is a very special date in the history of this country.
Elena then told me about two veterans of the Red Army who were among the first to arrive at Hitler's bunker. They live on the outskirts of Moscow. I'm going to Lev Bezamensky and we'll find out if he can tell us something original. Because he was a translator during the war. It's always good to ask people who were really involved, because usually when you read it in the books, and then sometimes it's going into the one or the other direction, and then when you talk to a real person, you find out that, you know, they on purpose they wrote something that is not absolutely right. Let's check that. Usually a personal conversation is much more helpful, much more. Lev Bezimensky was a soldier at the Berlin front, whose fate was forever altered by the handling of Adolf Hitler's remains. Wie haben Sie das erste Mal davon erfahren, dass Hitler gestorben ist? I asked Lev how he became involved.
Darüber, dass Adolf Hitler gestorben ist, und zwar
I learned about Adolf Hitler's death the night between April 30th and May 1st, 1945.
45. Ich war damals
At the time, I was an officer and military translator in the intelligence department of the division of the 1st Belarus Front, the army group that took Berlin.
des Stabes des ersten belarussischen Front, das war die Heeresgruppe, die Berlin genommen hat.
On the night of May 5th, 1945, Beziminsky was called to translate a letter for the commander-in-chief at the front, Marshal Zhukov.
Stand da dort, dass wir
It said, "We, Goebbels and Bormann, notify you, Mr. Stalin, as the first non-German, that the leader of the German people, Adolf Hitler, is dead,
des deutschen Volkes Adolf Hitler tot
and that was my first contact with this, excuse me, problem, the death of Adolf Hitler."
Scheiß Problem, tot Adolf Hitler.
Elena Ryshevskaya, also a Russian translator in Berlin at the time, witnessed the removal of two charred corpses that she believes were the bodies of Hitler and Eva Braun.
We were very few, the people who walked on this and who had access. I went to the courtyard where there was an extra entrance to Hitler's bunker. They were lying right there next to the tunnel when I saw them. The face was not recognizable. It was a black mask. It produced a strong impression on me, but an impression not of a human, but an evil black creature, all twisted.
Hitler had so feared that his corpse would suffer the same public humiliation as Mussolini that he commanded that his body be burned beyond recognition.
End of April 1945, there isn't the equipment or the fuel available there, I'm talking about, to do this.
Without enough petrol, the fire failed to fully destroy Hitler's corpse and teeth. Elena was a member of the team sent to track down Hitler's dental X-rays. Today, they prove critical to my investigation. But what actually happened to the Führer's remains continues to elude me.
Later, the bodies underwent an autopsy. The findings were compiled in a report with many pages that was presented to Stalin at the beginning of June.
The first autopsy was in important respects botched. One could, I suppose, say, well, they just weren't terribly competent people. I'm not prepared to buy that line. One has to keep in mind that there is a very large amount of drinking going on. And most of the soldiers and officers at the end of a long and bitter and bloody fight are much more interested in having a good time and getting drunk than looking around and trying to figure out whose corpse is which ones and whatnot and so on the basic assumption that if they're dead, they're not going to do us any harm anymore, and they'll be as dead tomorrow or the day after I sleep off my drunk as they are today. And so there is no great rush.
Under orders from Stalin, the corpses of Hitler and Braun, along with the official autopsy documents, disappeared behind the Iron Curtain.
For a society that Stalin himself wanted to present to the world as advanced and scientific and in every way leading, then to produce a bunch of autopsies which had clearly significant defects in them may have looked like a poor idea.
Not only did Stalin secret away the autopsy results, he denied the existence of Hitler's dental and medical X-rays, and silenced the testimonies of German witnesses by throwing them into prison. Hitler historian Gerhard Weinberg.
Are considered not objects. The concealment of the reality of Hitler's death and identification, particularly by dental evidence, that this really was Hitler's corpse, opened a propaganda opportunity that he was really alive and that he was advising those good-for-nothing imperialist Americans and British.
And so the rumors grew. Hitler in Argentina, Hitler in Spain. Stalin himself suggested to General Eisenhower that the #1 war criminal escaped to Japan on a German submarine. Even after Stalin's death, the survival myth lived on. Finally, in 1968, Lev Beziminsky tried to set the record straight in a book called The Death of Adolf Hitler. But the KGB forced him to omit an important piece of information.
There were recommendations made by the KGB that I am supposed to follow. Otherwise, I will be denied access to the files. I am to write that Hitler's remains were burnt already in June 1945, and I was asked to stick to the version where Hitler poisoned himself.
Der Version folgen, als ob Hitler sich vergiftet hat.
There you have a fairly clear-cut political motive, and that is to picture this man as one who didn't have the courage to shoot himself, that poison is, so to speak, the weak person's way out, as opposed to the real He-Man who will shoot himself.
I found that very interesting because it really gives me the idea that the whole, secrecy thing and strategy thing and Cold War thing was of importance in this investigation, and maybe we have to have that in the backs of our mind. In reality, only a select few Kremlin insiders knew where Adolf and Eva's remains were really hidden.
For reasons that I'm afraid I have no explanation for, they had buried them in East Germany, in what was then the German Democratic Republic. In 1970, the then head of the Soviet secret police, presumably with the agreement of other members of the Politburo, decided it was just simply, in the long run, too risky against the possibility of some kind of future shrine to Hitler, to leave them there. So the corpses were literally physically dug up, ground up, and tossed.
But a few bits of Adolf and Eva seemingly survived. Hitler's skull, teeth and other evidence were rumored to have been secretly shipped to Moscow. Today I'm visiting Russia's state archives, where I'm told Hitler's skull was discovered quite by accident in 1993.
It was a huge shock for us. We opened a box and we found some fragments of bone. And then we found a note attached which said, "This is fragments of the skull of Hitler."
Finally, with the help of Isabel, my translator, and archivist Dina Nikolayevna Nahatovich, it's time to sort fact from fiction. This is it. Deep in the bowels of the Russian State Archive building, months of high-level requests in my forensic investigation into Hitler's death were about to pay off.
One day we came to decided to tidy up one of the big safes which we have in the archives. So we started to go through this bag of papers, and really, I can't repeat often enough, it was a huge shock for us.
Beautiful box.
We opened a box and we found some fragments of bone. And then we found a note attached which said, "This is fragments of the skull of Hitler."
I couldn't believe it. All that's left of the man who launched the bloodiest war in human history sits in a floppy disk storage box. A fitting end, I suppose.
This seems to be a fragment, right? So is this the only fragment that is in the archive?
My name is Dr. Mark Binecki, forensic expert extraordinaire.
Okay.
Has this been a dream of your career to see this?
Well, it's very interesting, but a case is a case. So.
Ему очень интересно, конечно, но работа есть работа.
Can I take it out?
Yes.
Yeah. Sure.
If it's really Hitler's, this skull could reveal many things.
It's very fragile.
Yeah, I will take good care.
Including the cause of death.
So what does this say?
This is a fragment of the skull. And then there is the date.
Yeah.
Are you looking in the bullet hole?
Yeah, I'm looking at the bullet hole. So these are two bullet holes? Or what do people think?
Здесь два дырки. Один или два.
You can see the bullet hole corroborating testimonies that claimed death by gunshot. It's also clear that a portion of the skull is missing, in accordance with the autopsy reports.
But it's very interesting because you can see that there are lines coming from. This could very well be an exit hole, not the entrance hole, but the exit hole.
While it appears that this person was shot in the head by a bullet, it's too soon to tell who the skull's owner is.
Yeah.
At this point, I wasn't even sure of the sex or age.
Just to compare the fracture lines to see, because you see the fracture lines here.
трещины, которые там есть.
Yeah.
So are you sure that the big hole is not from a bullet, it's just Maybe just from damage sustained.
It could be. I mean, on this side, it's really severely charred and burned.
From the fire
The burn marks serve as further confirmation that, like Adolf and Eva, this person's head was subjected to intense fire.
As if it was an exit wound, because you have the big one.
The skull wasn't the only evidence Dina found that day. She also discovered pieces of the couch, including shreds of blood-splattered fabric.
These seem to be armrests, or maybe it's from the bottom of the couch. I was very much interested in the blood stains. There are very interesting, very, very tiny blood stains. Maybe there was blood flowing down here. So I will try to measure them a little bit and try to find the angle of impact. Actually, we are not trying to draw conclusions just from the stains only. We also try to fit it with the whole criminalistic story and the whole history that is recorded. Most likely the fabric is from the underside of the sofa, but I'm not so sure yet.
In this case, the bloodstains are very difficult to interpret because they are faded very much, and it looks as if they were washed out of the fabric or something.
At least 20 or 30 of these tiny stains are cut out, so I guess that somebody tried to determine the blood type or the blood types. I mean, this could be blood also from Eva Braun and from Adolf Hitler, we don't know.
If you really want to identify a person, and if this is the only task or the most urgent task, then it helps to find out the blood type of a person, because if you know the blood type from medical records, then you can try to confirm it. Since the blood stains on the fabric were so faded, I decided to try the remnants of blood splatter on couch pieces. If they read, the results will not only match Hitler's blood type A, but might also confirm cause of death. If it was Hitler's blood, then you would have to assume that blood came out of his body. Now, blood could not come out of his body by biting on a poison capsule, but only by shooting himself. Back at my hotel room that night, I was too excited to sleep.
So here I am, back in my beautiful, yet a little bit moldy hotel room. So there we've got, that's part of the skull. I'm especially interested here in the hole.
So far, I'm among the few scientists to gain unhindered access to these artifacts. I was sitting on a treasure trove of evidence that demanded further analysis. Next, I arranged a meeting in Washington, D.C. with 2 of my colleagues, and once again hopped on a plane. It is very important to talk to a forensic anthropologist because I brought back from Moscow for the first time high-resolution pictures. We could blow them up as much as we wanted and look onto the very fine crack lines that may tell you something about the age of the person or maybe about the sex of the person. That's very important. Marilyn London is a forensic anthropologist who is an expert at figuring out the age and sex of old bones. Michael Baden's specialty is forensic pathology. Working with the New York Police Department, he has seen it all. Michael Baden is a very interesting person to talk to because he has a lot of experience with crime scenes and he also can fill in something from the criminalistic standpoint. Since the blood splatter samples from Moscow revealed nothing, Marilyn and Michael's analysis of the skull is critical. So this is obviously where it came out.
Correct.
Right.
And
because of the beveling.
Yeah.
Right.
Once we orient the skull and see what direction the bullet went, it may be that the bullet went in at such a shallow angle that the gases expanded, and that's right along a suture where the skull is likely to separate anyway. When an anthropologist looks at a skull, the first thing you want to do is do the inventory of the skeletal material present and document any features that you see that would help you determine, first of all, age and sex. So because males are larger, they have greater muscle mass to move their skeleton around. And because the muscle mass is greater, the muscle attachments are larger on the skull. So we can't really say too much about the sex of the individual based on what we have. The parietals don't provide very much information. The top of the occipital doesn't provide very much information. So
why did the bullet go out there? Why couldn't it go out elsewhere?
I know. Why did they save that part?
Yeah,
I don't know. And unfortunately, we don't have the diagnostic features that could be used for the determination of age and sex from the skull. So what we do have is the information about where the bullet came out.
If we take the skull and take this replica of the 7.65 millimeter PPK Walter weapon, and if Hitler had put it in his mouth to commit suicide and held it going upwards and slightly to the left, then that track would fit. It would go in the hard palate, the upper part of the mouth, and cause an entrance bullet wound, miss that autopsy because of the burning, and exit through this darkened area in the left side of the skull. There's no specific mention in the autopsy report about what kind of tests they did for cyanide. It does say they smelled cyanide.
Yeah, but not only the Russians, also the people in the bunker.
And the bunker smelled, but that's a tricky business because 40% or so of people have the ability to smell that odor and the rest can't.
If he took cyanide, would he still have time to shoot himself before he died?
Marilyn had hit upon one of the critical questions of my investigation.
Yeah, when we take cyanide, it's absorbed into the bloodstream and goes around and blocks the ability of the red cells to give up oxygen to the organs, so that the red cells are filled with oxygen, but they can't get into the brain and other organs, and that's what causes death, because we die from really internal suffocation, and it's very rapid. But it does take a minute or two. So it is possible to put a capsule in the mouth, crush it, and while it's being absorbed, to shoot oneself.
So from everything that you have seen and also from your experience as a medical examiner, do you think that the piece of bone that we have the high-resolution pictures of, what do you think? Is it more likely that it is part of Hitler's skull, or do you think it's unlikely?
I think on the basis of what we looked at and what the Russians have, that at present there's not enough evidence to say that those portions of the skull indeed came from Hitler.
We haven't really ruled out that it is Hitler's skull, and maybe it is, and that would be interesting to pursue, but I don't think that we can comfortably say that we can assume that it's part of Hitler's skull.
After all these years, this fragment of skull continues to withhold its identity. But my investigation is far from over. There are other crucial pieces of evidence, including Hitler's alleged teeth that the KGB claimed to have stored away for years.
When we went to the KGB, it looked very much like in a James Bond movie. You had these light blue curtains and the brown heavy seats and everything, so it was a little bit unreal.
Colonel Vladimir Vinogradov is the curator of the former KGB archives.
It's a pleasure. I mean, it was a big deal. They put it on the tables and they opened the suitcases, like in a ceremony. That was interesting to see.
Today we've brought to you these files that relate actually to the death of Hitler and the remains particularly of Hitler, because it's what you're interested in, and what happened in the bunker where Hitler died.
Конечно, это дела органов СМЕРШ, военной контрразведки советской.
It was the intelligence service of the war, the Soviet army, who did the investigation.
Yeah. Oh. Oh, now I see.
First of all, on the 2nd of May, we found the body of the Goebbels family. For Goebbels, there was this false limb.
Вы увидите фотографию Геббельса.
So that's him.
Да, это Геббельс, останки Геббельса. Видите, вот его эта нога.
The children who you can see in these photographs here, their bodies, you see, they were actually in a separate place in the bunker, in the sleeping quarters. This is a very, very upsetting picture to see these children lying in their beds as if they were alive, sleeping, but in fact they were dead. Of course, it was quite easy for people to identify the children of Goebbels because they'd been playing in the bunker for a while. Also, they found his cigarette case. There's a huge hole here in this photograph where Hitler and his wife Eva Braun were buried. The most important evidence, of course, came from people who knew about the teeth. Aren't they beautiful, don't you think?
They are beautiful. They are really beautiful.
I brought with me a critical piece of evidence for comparison: the dental X-rays that Elena Ryszewskaja found back in 1945. After many months of requests, I had hoped to see KGB photos of the teeth.
Open the little box if you want to.
Yeah, all right.
I never dreamed they'd actually let me examine the real thing.
Let's see what we've got here.
You can see it.
Yeah, that looks...
What can you see?
Well, it's just a little more magnified, and you can see, you know, between the teeth, you can now see what's between them. Very good. Wow. This is the bridge that actually helped in identification very much, because on the X-rays you can see this very particular type of bridge. I mean, nobody has that. It's in the files. It says that Hitler didn't want to go to the dentist anymore, so he said, "Please, you know, make some bridge for me that will last until the end of the days," and it did, obviously. Oh, there we go. This is the bridge again. The bridge is here. So that is the structure over here. Very unique, and this is the same structure that you can see on the X-ray here. That's very much the same. Ready? As a forensic scientist, you document everything that you see. I take pictures on a very high resolution, and so later on I can make enlargements very easily. You know, and not many people can see this, so I can share these pictures with my colleagues. So that's the idea. Well, this is an X-ray taken during the lifetime of Hitler in 1944, and it shows some dental work that is very easy to match, even for a layperson. So you see the bridge structure, the very firm bridge structure over here, and this is obviously matching in here. I mean, look at this. This is all full metal over here. It's a very, very unusual structure, I would say. So this matches in on the top.
Can I get close up?
Here on the top, you can see something very interesting. You see that there is kind of a bright spot, whereas everything else is very dense. So the reason is maybe, or most likely, that it's the dental work that you can see here. It has, on the back, it is totally massive, but some are massive on the front too, and some are not. Well, at least they have a white blend in here, so it's not that dense.
Like the skull, the edges of the teeth are charred black from severe burning. Now they are just objects. But Adolf Hitler used these teeth to launch his most potent weapons of all: words. According to historian Gerhard Weinberg, even more than fear, it was Hitler's use of language that rallied a modern nation to follow him down the road to barbarism.
He developed into a very shrewd manipulator of the public, and it turned out to be extraordinarily easy to mesmerize large numbers of people and build up their level of enthusiasm to participate in some of the most horrendous things that could be suggested, with a almost manic dedication.
Today, these newsreels are being used by a forensic dentist who has devised a remarkable method of identification.
You see a lot of radio opacity here.
If he's right, I may obtain final confirmation that the teeth I held in my hands in Moscow are those of Adolf Hitler. With X-rays and my new photo evidence in hand, next stop Zurich. Today I'm going to visit forensic dentist Michel Perrier, who claims to have used old Nazi films to further identify Adolf Hitler's remains.
Here I am in Zurich Airport on my way to Perrier, who will have a look on the reflection patterns that are produced by light reflecting from the teeth of Hitler in a movie by Leni Riefenstahl. She was a German director. She did a movie where you can see Hitler making faces all the time, and putting his teeth in front.
As I train through the Swiss countryside, I think about my grandfather. He was a policeman during Hitler's reign. And my father spent 2 years in a refugee camp. So I'm connected in a very personal way. But for scientists like myself and Dr. Perrier, this is more about pushing the limits of forensic investigation.
Yes. Oh, hello. Hello. I was watching a movie on the TV, you know, and this movie was showing something about the Third Reich, and you could see Hitler giving some speeches showing his teeth when he looks very angry. And when I was watching his teeth, any dentist would do that, I was thinking, well, maybe we could have tried to make an identification just using the pictures that we see on the movies. That's the Olympic Games in '36. So you see here, if we make a stop, most likely this is a gold tooth, and he had a gold canine. This is during another of his speeches where he's showing his lower teeth, very elongated teeth, which is a sign of periodontal disease. This is the canine, gold canine, with a gap between the gold canine and the other teeth here. We can see this very well when the movie is rolling. What I used was what was in the book of Lev Bezhimensky, and then I used also the X-rays. You see here a lot of radio opacity, which shows that there is a lot of bridge work, because anything that is made out of gold or ceramics is going to be radio opaque, you know, so it will show white on an X-ray, you know. And here again, you see a lot of radio opacity here and a lot here, which means that there is a lot of bridge work, an upper bridge and 2 lower bridges. On the upper bridge that was found, there was this so-called window crown that we see very well also on the pictures, you know, which is enamel surrounded by gold.
Perrier took these X-rays and compared them to Nazi propaganda films.
So these are pictures that I took in the former KGB archive. Do they
He measured the reflection angles when light came onto. I mean, there was a lot of metal in Hitler's teeth, so he measured which parts of the teeth would blink depending on how Hitler would move his head and depending on where the lights came from.
But this is also corroded gold at the same time. Yes. So everything is corroded.
Yes. Corroded by fire and by time.
How much burning does it need? I mean, because we know that there was only 180 liters of gasoline used. Do you think that makes sense, or is this from maybe? Yeah.
You know, there was not just the gasoline. There was also the bombing, because when they burned these bodies in outside the bunker, there was a lot of bombing going on. You know, it was the end of Berlin, so all this went together.
After leaving Perrier, I felt like the final pieces of that puzzle had fallen into place. Perrier's investigation is very interesting because it really adds something. You know, there are so many people who believe in conspiracy theories and everything, so you could still say this is all fake. But what Perrier did is he found something that is totally independent. Nobody could fake that evidence. I mean, there's no way you could fake a Leni Riefenstahl film of Hitler giving a speech. I mean, that's just impossible to fake the teeth in that movie.
No, why
What Perrier did is he just drew the final line under the whole thing. The teeth of Hitler are the teeth of Hitler. But the skull is a different story. The existing evidence is less convincing. To get a final conclusive proof from the standpoint of a forensic scientist, it would be very, very helpful to link the skull cap, where we see the exit wound of the bullet, to the teeth, because we know that the teeth are from Hitler, and if we could link the skull cap to the teeth, that would be something that would definitely unravel the mystery. The best way to link the two now is to compare DNA from the skull to the teeth. But alas, Moscow brought my investigation to an abrupt halt. My request to draw a DNA sample from Hitler's teeth has been refused. In the end, this fragment of skull continues to hold on to its secrets. Maybe it's for the best. Russian officials still fear that Hitler's remains could draw neo-Nazi pilgrims. Long after his death, the legacy of hatred that Adolf Hitler fostered lives on.